A woman carefully navigates through the barbed wire in front of her, afraid to make the slightest sound. Unfortunately, she fails to notice the trap at her feet. Evelyn senses that something is wrong, and runs as fast as she can with her children, as if she is afraid of something terrible. Marcus, running ahead at great speed, accidentally steps into a second trap. He lets out a heart-wrenching scream, but Evelyn quickly covers his mouth and urgently whispers that he must not make any noise. Just then, the baby in her arms starts crying. Evelyn has no choice but to instruct her daughter to place her brother in a specially made soundproof box, leaving only a tube for breathing. Evelyn then struggles to pry open the bear trap, the intense pain causing Marcus to scream uncontrollably. As Evelyn goes to comfort her son, she senses something is wrong. The feared event occurs, with terrifying roars. A monstrous creature bursts through the barbed wire and rapidly approaches. Seeing this, Reagan quickly pulls out a portable speaker and places her hearing aid on the microphone. A piercing noise immediately erupted, and the monster, seemingly terrified of the electric sound, stood in place writhing in pain. Evelyn seizes the moment to lift her shotgun and decisively shoots the creature dead. But the crisis isn't over. As the gunshot might attract more of these creatures, they rush toward an abandoned factory ahead, hoping to find a safe place to hide. However, a figure suddenly abducts the siblings midway, followed closely by Evelyn, who has a man's hand over her mouth. The man gestures for silence, then glances toward the nearby noise. The creatures have already been alerted. The man hurriedly carries the injured Marcus as Evelyn and Reagan follow closely. Under the man's guidance, Evelyn and her family reach another factory building, yet even slight noises attract the monster's attention, as it furiously pursues them, demolishing everything in its path. As the monster nearly catches up, they jump into a large pipe ahead. This place turns out to be the man's residence, complete with a perfectly safe panic room. The panic room resembles a bank vault. Once the door is closed, no sound can be heard from outside, but just as they breathe a sigh of relief, the man issues an eviction notice, as he does not have enough food and water for Evelyn and her family. It seems these monsters have now taken over the world. Once the rulers of the earth, humans have become like rats scurrying across the streets. Fortunately, these monsters are blind and rely only on hearing to hunt, but they seem to be everywhere, ready to pounce at the slightest sound. After the disaster, Evelyn and her family were living on a farm with her husband Lee, when they were unfortunately attacked by the monsters. To protect his family, Lee had to sacrifice himself, leaving Evelyn with a newborn baby and 2 children. In the process of fighting the monsters, they accidentally discover the creature's weakness, the noise from the hearing aid. This discovery allows them to narrowly escape from the monster's clutches. However, the farm is left in ruins after the attack, forcing Evelyn to search for a new refuge with her children. Thus, they inadvertently end up in the man's territory, inadvertently setting off his traps. Faced with the man's eviction order, Evelyn says little, only silently mouthing the man's name with tears in her eyes as she opens the soundproof box. It turns out that Evelyn knew this man before the disaster. His name is Emmett, a longtime friend of her husband, initially reluctant to reveal his identity or take them in. Given the scarcity of food in this post-apocalyptic world, Emmett softens at the sight of the newborn. Emmett ultimately decides to let Evelyn and her family stay and even helps treat Marcus's injured leg. Fortunately, the bear trap did not damage Marcus's bones, and after some rest, he will be able to get out of bed and walk. However, as they sat down to chat, Marcus, who was wearing headphones, heard a song on the radio, suggesting that there might be survivors nearby. This song was a familiar one to Emmett, having been on continuous play for months, but he didn't believe anyone was still alive. At night, Reagan quietly took Marcus to the panic room, believing that the song they had heard earlier was a signal guiding survivors to a safe place. The radio station, she had found out, was located on a small island not far from here. They could follow the railroad tracks to the coast, then find a boat, reaching the island in just one day. Once there, they could use the island's broadcasting station to send out radio waves that the monsters feared, potentially saving more people. However, after hearing his sister's plan, the timid Marcus didn't want to proceed, fearing the danger, and planned to tell their mother. Reluctantly, Reagan set out alone along the railroad tracks the next morning. Upon learning of Reagan's departure, Evelyn immediately sought out Emmett, tearfully pleading with him to bring Reagan back. Emmett doesn't want to take any chances for his own safety, but Evelyn begins a moral abduction. Meanwhile, Reagan discovered a derailed train ahead, with all the passengers long dead and their bones dried out, a clear handiwork of the monsters. Reagan then opened a door and saw a medical kit, so she carefully reached out to grab it. Just as she finally got hold of the medical kit, a body suddenly fell, startling her. Still reeling from the shock, Reagan sat down to catch her breath, only to realize in horror that a monster had heard the noise and was approaching. With no way out, she had no choice but to pull out the speaker and press the hearing aid against the microphone. The noise made the monster agitated but did not stop its advance. Seeing this, Reagan decisively picked up a shotgun from the ground and fired at the monster. Although the shot hit the monster, it was not fatal and instead enraged the creature, which charged at Reagan with reckless abandon. At the last moment, a gunshot rang out, and the monster fell dead. Emmett had arrived just in time. Before more monsters arrived, they quickly left the train and took shelter in a nearby building. After ensuring the monster had not followed them, Emmett signaled for Reagan to return with him, but she still refused. Perhaps the island was a safe zone established by survivors. Even if the odds were slim, she felt she had to try, not wanting her family to live in fear forever. After hearing her words, Emmett did not reply, and exhausted, Reagan fell asleep. But when she woke up, she was shocked to find her hearing aid and speaker gone. Going outside, she saw no sign of Emmett. Reagan thought Emmett had abandoned her, and in despair, she knelt and cried. Just then, Emmett appeared with her belongings, announcing he had found a boat at the dock. Meanwhile, Evelyn noticed that the baby's oxygen was running low, so she decided to go out to find oxygen tanks and some medicine for Marcus's leg while he was asleep. But as Evelyn was about to leave, Marcus woke up and climbed up to join her. Evelyn quickly went to her son, telling him she needed to go out and promised to be back before dark. Although scared, Marcus bravely closed the hatch. On the other side, Reagan and Emmett, after a long walk, reached the dock before nightfall. As they were preparing to board the boat, they discovered a frightened girl squatting on the planks. Emmett approached slowly, comforting her not to be afraid. Unbeknownst to him, he had walked into a trap set by others. The girl suddenly looped a rope around Emmett's neck and ran off, and by the time Emmett turned around, he was surrounded by other survivors. Meanwhile, as Marcus saw his mother had not returned, he couldn't resist opening the hatch to check outside. He carefully made his way to the second floor and looked out the window but still saw no sign of his mother. Noticing a nearby room, he entered to see if there were any useful items, but behind a curtain, he discovered a decomposed body. The noise was enough to attract the monsters, so Marcus quickly closed the hatch and returned to the basement. As he placed the baby back into the panic room, a monster indeed followed them up. Seeing the monster about to burst through the pipe, Marcus hurriedly closed the hatch, but in his panic, he failed to block the latch with a cloth strip nearby, causing the hatch to lock completely. By the time Marcus realized what had happened, it was too late. With the chamber now fully sealed, the air inside began to diminish, and Marcus, struggling to breathe, had to take turns using his brother's breathing mask to make matters worse. The creature had forced its way in. Evelyn had just returned to the factory when she heard a loud noise. Immediately sensing trouble and quickening her pace, realizing that a monster had broken in, she decisively placed an oxygen tank aside, then pulled back and fired her weapon. When the monster inside was drawn out, Evelyn seized the opportunity to detonate the oxygen tank beside it. However, the explosion did little to the tough-skinned monster, which remained lively and unharmed. But this was within Evelyn's expectations, as her real intent in exploding the oxygen tank was to trigger the factory's fire suppression system. As the monster stepped closer, bringing the crisis to a head, the fire hoses finally sprayed out a massive volume of water. Using the noise of the water as cover, Evelyn carefully moved towards the hatch. Once she reached the basement, she quickly opened the hatch and strategically placed a cloth strip on the latch. Fortunately, the baby was unharmed, and Marcus had only passed out temporarily. When the monster jumped down again, Evelyn decisively shut the hatch, narrowly escaping danger. But Emmett and Reagan, who had been captured, were in a dire situation, as the post-apocalyptic thugs not only took their supplies but also planned to take Reagan away. In an effort to rescue Reagan, Emmett disregarded the risk of attracting monsters and immediately rushed forward, using a rope to ensnare one of the thugs, while Reagan took the opportunity to jump into the water. The nearby monsters were quickly drawn by the noise and began furiously attacking the thugs. As the monsters approached him, Emmett swiftly used a dagger to fatally wound a thug and, killing him, leapt into the water himself. Emmett had just surfaced when he saw the last few thugs being killed by the monsters. Emmett thought he would be safe in the water, but the monsters seemed to detect his location and followed him into the water. Emmett was so scared that he swam forwards, but he realized that the monster couldn't swim, and then one of the monsters jumped into the boat. Emmett was quickly pulled onto the boat by Reagan, and they rowed the small boat towards the island. Before long, they successfully arrived at their destination. Unexpectedly, they found that there indeed were survivors on the island, living normal lives, which seemed utterly unbelievable, a completely different world. And as the leader of the island, the man welcomes all the surviving humans and offers them food and water. The song was indeed a signal they had sent out. After discovering that the monsters could not swim, the man had led everyone here. At the time, many boats were gathered at the dock, but only theirs made it successfully. The next day, Emmett told Reagan that they would go back for the others, but as he stood by the sea the next morning, contemplating a life no longer on the run, he suddenly heard an unusual noise. Following the sound, he was shocked to find the boat with the monsters had drifted over. Emmett immediately sensed the gravity of the situation and ran towards the camp, warning everyone to quickly take shelter indoors, but it was too late. The monsters furiously attacked the survivors at the camp. Emmett ran forward to save a boy and managed to bring him into the leader's home. After securing the two children, they hurriedly got into a car. As they drove, the leader constantly honked the horn, planning to lure the monsters away from the camp towards a nearby broadcasting station to kill them. Soon, the monsters were drawn to them, and the roof of the car was torn open by a monster in an instant. Luckily, the leader floored the gas pedal, throwing the monster off the car. Once they reached their destination, they quickly entered the broadcasting station, ready to turn on the broadcast, but the leader suddenly paused, worried that the monsters might not have followed fast enough and might have turned back. He handed the keys to Emmett, preparing to go back to rescue the children, when in the next second, a monster suddenly appeared and dragged him out. They quickly ran into a nearby room, but soon the monster broke down the door, forcing them to hide in a corner, daring not to make a sound. But this was no solution. To kill the monster, Reagan had to enter the broadcasting booth. Since the monster was at the front door, they had no choice but to sneak in through a window. With Emmett's help, Reagan managed to get inside. Meanwhile, Evelyn was also facing a crisis. Seeing the oxygen tanks they had brought back were nearly depleted, they risked opening the hatch. Evelyn thought the monster had left, so she carefully stepped out. But just as she picked up a backpack from the ground, the monster appeared behind her. Almost simultaneously, Reagan also inadvertently disturbed a monster. Seeing this, Emmett quickly jumped into the broadcasting booth. The next second, the monster burst through the door, and flying debris accidentally injured Emmett's foot. Emmett was prepared to sacrifice himself for Reagan's safety. Meanwhile, upon spotting the monster, Evelyn immediately rushed toward the panic room. However, before she could close the hatch, the pursuing monster swatted it away with a slap. The monster attempted to squeeze into the panic room, its long claws scratching Evelyn's thigh. Meanwhile, the monster was closing in on Emmett as well. In the final moments of life and death, Reagan timely turned on the broadcast and pressed her hearing aid against the microphone. Hearing the piercing noise through the headphones, Marcus knew his sister had succeeded. He immediately took action. No longer timid, he decisively picked up a handgun lying nearby and shot the monster dead. Reagan also took the opportunity to grab an iron rod and slowly approach the monster, successfully killing it. With Reagan's wisdom, the family was once again lucky to escape. Although the harsh apocalypse would not end there, the children had grown strong enough to confront the terrifying monsters.